Really great event planned next, which will be introduced in a moment. Only order of business I had this morning is just to welcome you to the third final day of PyCon 2017, a conference that seemed like there was so much in front of us when there were 3 full days still in the future. Now has a lifespan measured only in hours. I did want to thank you all for your excessive calmness yesterday when PyCon caught fire. In your comportment, in your restraint, in many cases in the glacial speed with which you exited areas in which alarms were going off, I think you proved yourselves the match of the little cartoon dog as you said, "This is fine." All right, it's time for the people up on stage to be introduced. Take it away.
All right, I think we're good. First, thank you, Brandon, and thank you, PyCon. We submitted this talk as a 30-minute talk. PyCon looked at it and said, hell, let's make it a keynote. What could go wrong? So we're going to find out what can go wrong. So a funny story. I'll tell some introductory remarks, and then we'll get to the panel. A funny story. Last year, I was at PyCon India, and I was invited to a wonderful panel by PyLadies Pune to talk about building communities. And then afterwards, this guy comes up to me and he says, how long have you been doing Python events? And I said, well, 1994. And he said, that was the year of my birth. So my first response was, dude, that's cold. My second response was, what a great idea for a talk. Because, yep, good. In 1994, the Python community started. Why did it start in 1994? Because of this email. Guido was in town. Michael McLay at NIST had access to a luxurious windowless government office room in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And the Python community was invited to come and talk to him, which is great because, go ahead. Whoops. Back one. The room had capacity for up to 20 people. The first PyCon, why would we need so much space? So go ahead. So the idea is we have an esteemed bunch of people from that workshop in 1994. We have to be a little quick on time because the old Python retirement home bus shows up in a little bit. It's Sunday bingo. Can't fight with that. And we're going to talk a little bit about what Python was like in 1994. This is intended to be, we'll have some opening remarks, and then Luciano will bring some people on stage to ask the first questions, and then we'll open it up to you. You better ask some damn questions, because I've got questions, and we don't want those, because they're embarrassing. But we're going to talk to each other. We're going to talk with you. You're going to talk with us. Go ahead. You may be here to learn some great revealed truth, to gain some esteemed wisdom. This ain't that talk. You're going to laugh with us. You're going to laugh at us. But we're going to laugh. We're going to have fun. We're going to tell some stories. So we will go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the panelists. And each of you, if you could, introduce yourself. What are you doing now? What were you doing then? And what's one thing you remember from the workshop, either going into it or coming out of it? We'll start with Robin Friedrich.
Hi, I'm Robin Friedrich. I currently work in mission control ground systems at Johnson Space Center. And back then, I actually was in the same place, except it was the space shuttle program, and we were doing pre-flight analysis and design and whatnot, and we were building software systems, and this new thing called object-oriented software systems. And that was piquing my interest, and I was searching the internet before the web and gophering, and managed to Gopher up object-oriented
Wait,
languages.
did you say Gopher?
Gopher.
All right.
Yeah. There was no Google. It's the G before Google. It was Gopher. And that's how I find CWI.NL in this crazy thing called Python that I downloaded and built on my Sun workstation. I was lucky enough to have. And had a prompt, a Python prompt within 20 minutes of discovering it.
All right, Jim and Barry, that looks like a special shirt.
It is.
All right, so Jim, before you introduce yourself, Barry, could you stand up and show the back of the shirt?
Sure.
To prove that this really is 1994, NIST, spam, Gaithersburg. That's got to be worth tens of dollars on eBay.
Tens.
All right, Jim.
So back then I was working at the U.S. Geological Survey, writing and supporting modeling and analysis software. And I had been looking for an OO scripting language. I was also kind of an OO zealot back then. And Python, I thought, could revolutionize a lot of the computing we did at USGS because I was a big believer in OO and because it was so accessible. Now I'm doing various sorts of activities around application development.
And audio-visual work. Barry. Barry conveniently takes over and starts talking.
Jim. Okay, so so application development, various phases, front end, back end, project management, that sort of thing. Currently focusing on some not pet projects, but projects near and dear to my heart, like ZODB and build out.
So my name is Barry Warsaw. Back in 1994, in fact, if you go back to the pictures of the people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Is this the most quintessential Barry photo ever?
Yeah.
This is what Barry looks like on the inside.
I took the ponytail and I stuck it up here. But the picture of the three of us, so back in 1994, I just started this job at CNRI, and the other person in that picture is Roger Massey. And Roger Massey and I worked together on this project called NoBots, and it was sort of like a project to move little software agents around the internet. And we were doing it on Next machines in Objective-C, and we had sort of heard that there was this Python Objective-C bridge. And so I had worked at NIST previously, and Mike McClay, who's the guy in the middle there, and Ken Mannheimer sent me an email and said, hey, we got this Dutch guy coming to talk about this crazy language that he wrote, and would you like to come up? And it wasn't, very far from where we lived, so we came and we sat, and we just really loved it. And so we thought, wouldn't it be really cool if we could, work with Guido and get this Objective-C Python bridge going? And one of our coworkers said, hey, I wonder if Guido wants to move to the US and actually, get hired to work on this project. And boy, did I ever. Yeah. Well, the funny thing, of course, was Guido came and interviewed, and of course everybody loved Guido. And so when he came, the first thing he did is said, we don't need Objective-C at all. We can do it all in Python. So.
All right, Guido, how did you get on the radar with Michael McClay? What led to that email?
What's that?
What led to that email? How did you get on the radar of Michael McClay? And
Well, Guido, right? Yeah.
Is my sound on? So I have been hacking on Python part in my spare time, part for my actual employer, CWI in Amsterdam, for almost 4 years by then. And I had seen small movements in the direction of community, but it was mostly like, oh, wow, the mailing list is getting really big. And I knew that the mailing list was getting really big because the only way to get on the mailing list was to send me a personal email to let me edit the alias file. So I also remember sometime early '94 being excited when people said, we want a Usenet news group named comp.lang.python. And that was sort of the pattern, comp.lang.c and comp.lang. Who knows what. And I was incredibly proud that there were people who wanted comp.lang.python for my little baby, and that I didn't have to do anything to make it happen. That was the best part, and that was sort of the beginning of of my attitude towards the community.
Unpaid labor force.
One important email that happened that summer that Paul didn't show, because it's been shown many keynotes before. What if Guido were hit by a bus? That was the same Michael McClay. He was also he was into being a community organizer. He didn't always know how to go about it, but he really wanted to build this community. So he had this great idea. He found some funding for a workshop and for inviting me over as well, I think I was a glorified intern or something. So, well, I thought, that sounds great. I've never lived in the US. Well, actually, I had another internship in Palo Alto a few years ago, but I had forgotten how that went. Yeah. So I set about with Michael, making the program, inviting the people. I don't know where we got the people. I think we just sort of put an advertisement on the Complang Python, or the Python list, which was already then sort of the same thing. And a bunch of people showed up, including, I think Barry and Roger actually had to sort of plead special circumstances to be allowed in after the 20 people quota was already filled up.
Yeah, and you mentioned Michael. We really do have to give him credit for a lot of things in the early years of Python. Your connection to CNRI, which was critical to a number of years. My memory of the workshop, I'm Paul Everitt. I'm the luckiest person. I get to be on the PyCharm team, but at the time, I was running www.navy.mil using Python as a pre-CGI language. The thing I remember about the workshop is working with Michael McClay on one of the agenda items we'll see later on creating a Python consortium and writing bylaws, which was the most hilariously stupid thing to work on. It was totally worthless at that time to start talking about formalizing things. But as the picture shows, this is the joke I tell about this. This is before I got married and found out you can spend more than $5 on a haircut. All right, so we're going to turn it over to Luciano, my great friend Luciano Ramallah. We've been doing this shtick for decades, and he's going to introduce the first questions and special guests we're going to bring on stage to get everything warmed up for us. Luciano.
So let's start by inviting Anwesha Das. She's a trained lawyer involved in open source, learned Python last year, rebooted PyLadies Pune, and is leading discussion about Python project licensing.
Greetings to the panel. So someone asked me here, do you have a PyLadies in India? I said, yes, we do. Wow, is it successful? And that struck me. How to define success of a community? Is it the success of individuals in a community, that they are getting good jobs, having great career, or they are giving back something to the community?
All right, great. Let's start, Barry, with you. You've been involved in a couple of communities over the years. I thought this was a great question. Is it about, do you define the scorecard based on what people give or what people get?
I think it's what people give. I mean, I think that, you know, in sort of any realm that you're in, the more you give, the more you get, right? That's a pretty common theme with gratitude and compassion. So, I mean, so there's one other person I really need to give a shout out to, which is Ken Manheimer, who was not in the pictures, but he was really instrumental in so many ways about kind of where we are today. And you know, there's a lot of people like that who have given so much to Python. And you know, in 1994, there's no way any of us could have even imagined looking out at a crowd like this and being here 23 years later, or whatever it is, 24 years later.
Yeah, I always view Ken as the owner of the official Emacs RC file.
Yeah.
Everyone just copies it from Ken. Jim, needless to say, with Zope, you had a very big community. Do you have any feelings on, certainly in the very beginning, the motivators for people and why one community succeeds and another doesn't, the giving versus getting?
Well, it's a feedback loop, so I would agree with Barry that giving is what causes a lot of the getting eventually.
Yeah. Robin or Guido, got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with Jim. It is a feedback loop, and when you see the number of people around you contributing and working long hours and helping other people just for no money at all, it encourages you to do the same, because you want to pay back a little bit for the benefits you got, and that's how it grows exponentially. Yeah. And this is exponentially more people than we certainly had on that first day.
Guido, you mentioned how cool it was that someone else set up the Usenet gateway. Let's go back to 1994 for you, 94, 95, 96, and that concept of creating the Python community, and Wesha's question about, is it more important to measure it by what people give and contribute versus what they get out of it in return?
I've never sort of tried to measure it either way. I've just sort of stood there and been amazed at how many people were doing stuff with my little creation that I hadn't anticipated. And sort of, I've always been so happy with the growth of this community. And I realize I have been giving a lot, but what I've been giving most is sort of me always making the language better. And initially by typing all the code myself, and eventually by encouraging other people to type the code and give it to me. And it took a long time before I stopped reviewing everything.
Stuart Williams had a good question that we're going to get back to later on that. So we'll go ahead and continue on the next one. Neela, I turned the podium duty over to Luciano for obvious reasons. I'm not standing behind that damn podium. But I'm in this chair because my feet didn't reach the floor with those chairs. So, let's go on to the next one.
All right, let's now invite Nicholas Tollervy, who is first a teacher, the original organizer of PyCon UK Teachers Summit, and instrumental in getting Python shipped on the BBC microbeat.
Hello, gentlemen. So there are literally millions of children learning to program with Python. Python is their first experience of programming. And I thought it would be interesting to ask you what your first experiences of programming were, and what words of encouragement you would give to the beginner programmers that are learning Python today. But I noticed while I was down there that this reminds me of a very famous Monty Python sketch. The Four Yorkshiremen, although there's 5 of you. So I'd like you to start your answers with, "When I were a lad," take it from there.
That'll be optional. Robin, I'll start with you because I remember when you gave your introduction about what you were doing at the time, we were so impressed that Python was being used at anything that might actually involve space flight.
Yes.
So go ahead and take that question and talk about what got you started in computing.
When I was a lad, actually, I was in high school, actually, in New York in the 70s, and the only way you could talk to a computer was via a 300 baud modem and a TTY and connect to PDP-11. And so I learned some basic in Fortran at that point, and but actually wound up playing a lot of Space War, which was a little quadrant, kill the Klingons game. So that's how I learned.
You know that 90% of the people have no idea what you just said. Baud, 300.
300 baud modem, yes.
All right, Jim.
Okay, well, when I were a lad, I think it was 8th grade when I first actually wrote programs, and it was programs that were saved on paper tape, and wrote a hangman game And each step in the game, you print out the hangman on a printer.
How many frames per second is that game?
What?
How many frames per second does that work out to?
Probably about 0.05.
All right. Good printer.
As far as advice, that's hard. I actually don't know the answer to that. When I try to encourage my kids to program, it was interesting trying to find the motivation. Ultimately, for one of my sons, we found that the easiest way to win the science fair for the county was to have it be computer science at the time.
All right. and a line printer, right?
And a what?
Line printer.
No. Then it was Max.
All right. Barry.
Well,
Oh, wait.
when I was a lad, my very first experience was with the teletypes in high school, and my friend George Butler and I were using those. But over the summer of my 11th and 12th grade, someone from another high school had hacked into the mainframes in the Board of Education. So they pulled all through those teletypes. So they pulled all the teletypes out, and they brought in the next year these microcomputers. They were all 6502 based, and you could, the main programming language was BASIC. But the thing I remember most about that was that we figured out where the list of commands, like the command lookup table was. And so none of the teachers understood how these computers worked, and very few of the students did. So George and I kind of took over the computer lab. And when the kids who, let's just say, maybe picked on us a little bit for our nerdiness, wanted help, sometimes we would go in there and change the commands so things like load was delete, So if they tried to load their file, it was, I don't know what happened. But the thing I would say is, and I think that's a great example, always be curious, right? Always be curious. Like, there's so much to learn, and I don't care, what you're doing today, there's stuff out there, and there's going to be new stuff out there, and that kind of curiosity and learning will take you, your entire life.
All right, good. Guido.
Okay, when I was a lad, I didn't know what a computer was. I was an electronics hobbyist, and I quickly started building little digital circuits. And my dream project that I never had enough of an allowance to buy the parts was to build a digital calculator, because I had built up the knowledge to sort of understand how digital circuits worked. So I knew I could build it. It would be this big. It probably wouldn't work very well or reliably, but I knew how to do it. It just didn't have probably the patience to solder all those parts together either. Then, at age 18, I went to university. They had a mainframe in the basement, and we skipped the teletypes or stuff. We had punch cards. And believe it or not, it was amazing. Despite all the sort of roadblocks put in your way when you're using punch cards and the delayed gratification of getting your listing back an hour after you handed it to the operator, I said, oh, this is my calling. This is what I want to do. In terms of advice, what I would add to Barry's sort of always be curious is follow your passion and don't care about what they say.
All right, good. Emotionally, I'm still a lad, so we'll turn over to the next one.
Now we're going to have Leonardo Jimenez, who is a lead developer at Code Tiger in the Dominican Republic and organizer of PyCaribbean, hoping to grow into leading Python conference in the region.
Thank you. I'm really grateful for the community and to be here. I think one of the thing that I love the most about Python is how inclusive you are about different people. And I see a pretty good amount of support with PyLadies, Django girls, and we think it's really great. And I see, for example, this supporting women to be part of the through mentoring of the Python and Django code base. And I would like to ask if there are any plans for mentoring and including more people from Latin America, and if there's not, what do you recommend for beginning doing that?
A wonderful question. Barry, do you want to, you've watched some of these things that Leonardo mentioned emerge. Do you want to comment on it?
Well, it's been really great to see that come up from the grassroots. And, you know, I think about the people who mentored me, you know, in my career. So many people that, you know, changed my life. And in a lot of ways, I think of Guido that way. And, you know, it's the pay it forward or the pay it back or something like that. And, you know, I think about like a lot of the kids that are coming up today, right? They're growing up in a world that is so different from us. Like, we grew up in a world where we discovered computers. You know, they were out there, but they weren't in everybody's pocket, for example. And a lot of the kids today, you know, my own son is in computer architecture. He's just finished up his freshman year. And, you know, to watch him go through that same discovery and learn, you know, from his mentors, you know, which I'm sure I'm not one of those, but, you know, so I guess that's what I would say is like think about the people who influenced you and changed your life. And, you know, it doesn't have to be a big effort, right? You don't have to like start a big, you know, 1,000-person mentorship program. Find one or two people in your neighborhood or a couple of kids in your own kids' school, you know, who are interested in computers, and help them learn the passion, the love of kind of what we do.
Do the three of you want to add anything to that?
Well, I do. A few years ago, maybe 7 years ago, I was at work. It was an internship program, and I got assigned to mentor a young engineering student. One of the first things I could tell her, I couldn't teach her all the engineering that goes into planning a shuttle mission, but I could teach her Python. So I spent the entire time teaching her Python from scratch, and by the end of the term, she was coding and doing data reduction tasks that any engineer could do just as well. So she took that passion for Python and took it back to college and spread it around there as well, because they don't always teach Python in engineering courses anyway. Sometimes you'll see it in comp sci courses, but in engineering they keep teaching you Fortran. Nowadays they try to push C++ on you or something like that, and it really pushes people away, I think, of programming until they see how easy it is to get things done with Python.
Fortran forever. All right, we'll move on. Let's go to the next one. Brandon had suggested that we talk about what was the agenda at that workshop, some of the ideas that were talked about in advance. Pretty funny reading these. So go ahead and start looking at some of these points. And we could talk a little bit about how we did and use that as a segue to talk about some of the problems, technical perhaps more than community, some of the things that we were facing in the first days of Python. So, Jim, do you have anything on that list that looks interesting to you?
Well, quite a few, but is the persistence thing on there? It is. I can't see it.
Oh, you're not going to do this, are you?
No, I'm not. But yeah, at the time, I was just sort of a sponge, you know, and my interest at the time was more how to use Python as a glue for things like Fortran and various sorts of data analysis activities. But later, of course, I became very interested in persistence, and I was interested in persistence at the time, but that was a long-term goal for me.
Guido, anything on the list that stands out to you?
All of them, but I want to call out one that's a funny one. Replacing make, RCS, and CVS with Python, which those projects have happened and become quite mature. There is, I forget what it's called, but there is definitely a build system completely based on writing snippets of Python. If someone remembers the name. Scones. Yes, Scones. And the other one, CVS, of course, ended up in Mercurial, which is all implemented in Python.
Bizarre.
How could we forget?
Wasn't Subversion connected to Python?
Greg
some way?
Stein got that kicked off, I think.
That's right, Greg Stein. Yeah.
Anything for the two of you on that list that you want to, Barry?
Well, the embedding Python in a www client, right? So that actually happened, right? When we were at CNRI, we, mostly Guido, wrote this browser called Grail. And I think it did actually get released at one point. But, it was a browser in 95 or 96 that you could, load Python. It would run dynamically in the browser.
And then you said, screw it, let's rewrite DNS, right? The handle system.
That's right. And I think actually Python was maybe this close to being the universal language in web browsers. I seem to remember, and I don't know, Guido might have a different recollection of this.
This is being recorded.
Okay, never mind.
Ask Barry that story later. Robin, got anything you want to?
Yeah, the reason I went to the first conference and was able to talk my boss into sending me on such a short notice was the fact that we were in a reusable, modular software development environment, but it was all C++. And we needed something that could enlist the engineering community. We had plenty of engineers, but we didn't have many software developers. So we wanted something that could glue and pull together and run a simulation from a nice high-level language. And that's all about .so files being dynamically linked in and call as C extensions to Python. And that's how we were going to build this grand system that later got cut in budget cuts, but that's neither here nor there. At least we got Python out of that experience.
All right, we'll go ahead and start opening up the audience. If you have questions, come up. You'll come on stage, ask them. Remember, you got to ask some questions because my questions are embarrassing. We may have to go back to the Netscape story if we hit rock bottom. So please come on up and line up here if you have some questions. I'll go ahead and start with one from Stuart Williams yesterday. He and I were talking about this panel and talking about the building of communities and cultures and why some communities turn out to be toxic, why some communities turn out to be inviting. We're talking about 1994 before there was a community, and Brett Cannon likes to say, come for the language, stay for the community. Why did that happen? Did we do something right? Did we do something wrong? Were we totally, completely oblivious to where it was going? Yes. Jim, do you have any comments on Python 1994 and where the community vibe came from?
I think a lot of it came from Guido, but Guido was always respectful and open to ideas, but the Python community in those days was very inviting. In fact, I remember when then Digital Creations got our initial investor, he was drawn to us and the community because of the atmosphere on the mailing lists.
True. That's true. Barry?
So Jim's absolutely right. It comes from Guido and the culture that, I wouldn't say the culture, but just the person that he is, But the other thing that I think is really important, it's stated, is the humor in Python. And it's always been, sort of this the link with Monty Python has been, the machine names in the early days, the cheese shop, things like that.
Any email ever written by Tim Peters?
So, yes, exactly. So the funny thing was, when I first saw Compline Python show up, I immediately, I was into languages and I started looking at it, and it was, for like the first couple of weeks, it was nothing but Monty Python jokes, which I love Monty Python, and I thought this is awesome, but why is it in Comp Lang? Like weren't talking about the language at all, so.
Rami, got anything to add on this?
Oh, yeah, it is. I pick up on that because Grail was another one that was. I was a Monty Python fan, so yes, okay, I was naturally drawn into it that way. It's had a certain level of good-naturedness in the community that you didn't see as much in other communities. At the time, there was this big language war going on. People would argue about Tickle or Perl or Python and all sorts of other things, but the Python community stayed. They knew the virtues and the ease of use of the language was worth it, and I don't know. I think it was the fact that there is a final arbiter. There's the nicest dictator you'd ever want in Guido, and in the beginning he was a judge, jury, and executioner, so he would decide what to do and execute it as well in the code. And then as time goes on, he backed away from the executioner role and had other people execute code and still be the judge and jury. And then now at this point, and the scale, he's just the judge, and there's a jury in Python dev that will go out and decide what to do as well. So,
94, 95, 96. Can you think of any other things that the emerging community was doing or not doing that contributed to the culture we have now?
I don't know. I just personally was always having so much fun and learning so much about things I didn't know anything about. And it was like finding out what people were doing with Python. I remember one of those very early conferences, there was a demo of the Alice system when it was still written in Python on top of tkinter. And Tommy Burnett, I think, gave a demo, and it was like, it went really well. He had this bunny, and he could control it by typing Python commands, and it was like bunny.left, bunny.right, bunny.jump. And then someone in the audience, and recently I think that must have been a plant, but anyway, an audience member yelled, "Can you sproing the bunny?" This was mysterious to me because I did not know the verb sproing, which is some obscure cartoon word. But Tommy didn't skip a beat. He just typed bunny.sproing, and there the bunny sproing. And it was like, it was such a great moment of joy for me that.
I guess the lesson is the Python
and I'm sure we had
Sproings.
many moments like that.
Yeah.
Well, I think a big priority early on that reflected was that a major part of Python's mission was to be accessible.
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, Leonard, you have a question?
So we know what the competition with Python is now, but those languages didn't exist in '94. What did you think was the competition? Which languages did you need to beat?
We'll have two. We've got to speed up a little bit, so we'll have two people. Guido, go first.
Well, for me, the competition was always Perl and Tcl.
Yeah.
And it was like, Perl had been invented maybe a year before Python, and it was invented in the US on the West Coast, so it was already spreading throughout the Unix channels. And it was made by this guy who was already famous because he had also written everyone's famous newsreader and the patch tool. So Perl was the top dog that I had to sort of compete with. And then there was Tcl, which also came from the US West Coast, was also sort of promoted by a loyal following. And then there was Python, and then there were some other languages that nobody remembers, some of which were not open source because their authors thought, oh, I am much better at designing a scripting language. In fact, I'm so good, I'm going to commercialize it.
Right.
And none of those happened. And for various reasons, somewhere in the early 2000s, I look back and I realized, hey, Python sort of passed by Perl effortlessly. What was I worried about? And then I have this memory in my mind of a Perl conference that I visited in the late 90s. Larry Wall staring over his coffee mug and saying, I'm not worried about Python.
Python was designed, Perl was accumulated, right?
Right.
Jim, here's where you talk about GNU Smalltalk.
Well, I don't think it was a competitor, especially not GNU Smalltalk. But Smalltalk at the time was commercial and it was very expensive. Yeah. It was awesome. But Python, to my mind, I don't think Guido has ever quite agreed with me on this, but I see a lot of similarities between Python and Smalltalk. Yeah. And Python was available to me. So was GNU Smalltalk, but it was a lot more exciting. Yeah. In the negative way.
All right. Next question, Chris.
So in the years since this first conference has happened, there's been a lot of code under the bridge, a lot of systems that have sprung up and lived and thrived and passed on, or maybe continued to thrive. I'd love to hear tales of the lost children of Python, the little bits and pieces that you wrote, that you loved, that you really enjoyed, that you thought would last forever and that have gone by the wayside.
All right, we'll have Barry and Robin take this one. Barry, you got anything?
Oh, well, I've written so much code that I've abandoned over the years. I don't really even know where to start, but like anybody who's doing open source, don't be afraid to abandon stuff that sucks,
Robin, can you think of anything?
Well, I never wrote that much code that got exposed to the outside world, but I did one thing, and that was HTML Gen, which was a synthetic web page markup generator in Python, which at first version was just to replace a functional piece of Perl code that I wanted to replace, because the day I downloaded Python was the day I stopped using Perl. And it's true.
It's the first step to recovery, right?
Yeah, so I had all this Perl code I had to, or functionally replace, and one of them was one that generated these HTML pages, these new things that were in the mid-90s. And so I just did it in an object-oriented way with a bunch of class for each element. And what struck me was I spent like an afternoon writing all this tedious code, and then I hit run to generate the first web page, and it worked, and there was no errors, no exceptions. Right. And to have code that you work on for hours run the first time just floored me, because I know I would have no chance of being able to do that in any other language.
We'll take one more quick question, then 20-second closing statements. So Doug?
Hey, I was surprised to see that you had Lisp on your first email. And so I was just, from a historical perspective, I programmed Lisp for 10 years in the mid-'80s. For 10 years, this was before Python, obviously. So what is the impact of Lisp, object-oriented modeling? Where did you get the object model? Was it like from Lisp, or just give me a historical perspective on it. I really want to know that. Thanks.
All right, just about 30 seconds. So,
where I got the object-oriented stuff. Object-oriented languages were in the air. Where I worked at CWI, there were a bunch of people super excited about C++. I somehow ended up teaching a week-long C++ class. I didn't know C++ as far as I understand now. Modula 3 or Modula 2 Plus were becoming somewhat object-oriented. I think that sort of Modula 3 in particular had an implementation trick for objects in something like C that I really liked. Yeah. And I just sort of took it from there. It was actually an intern who suggested that we should have a class statement, since the language itself was already class-based.
All right, so let's go ahead. We're running out of time, so let's, 20 seconds, anything you want to put on the historical record or any piercing insight. Robin?
Piercing insight? No, I have no piercing insight. Let's see. No.
All right. Python 1994, ladies and gentlemen. Jim, you got anything?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, we were just ad-libbing, and the ground was very fertile there, and Python was just being developed, and
well
everybody was coming from different angles and growing Python and its effectivity in all sorts of different areas, and it was very general purpose. Other languages at the time tended to be pigeonholed in one thing that they were noted for.
All right, Jim?
I think it's worthwhile to note the conference naming system as it's evolved over time.
Jim ran PyCon 2 and 3 at USGS.
I most certainly did not. I ran Spam 2 and Spam 3. So before there was PyCon, there was the International Python Conference. Yeah. But before that, there was Spam 1, Spam 2, Spam 3. How high did that go? I don't remember. I'm going to say Spam 5 or Spam 6. I think it went up to Spam 6.
I think it went to 5.
5? Yes, I actually, that was by far my favorite conference naming system. I regret that we abandoned that.
Cleveland, let's bring it back.
Yes.
Oh,
Barry.
yeah.
Well, I don't know about pithy stuff, but or insight, but I will mention one thing about the Lisp connection, and this is something I remember from the first workshop. We talked about wanting to do doc strings, and at the first workshop, both Guido and I don't know if you still use it, but I still use Emacs, right? Yep. So we were both Emacs users and Emacs Lisp programmers, and so we recognized, yay. Yeah.
All four.
Rock on.
Emacs rules.
So we
Get your
recognized
300
that,
ball
like,
modem back, buddy.
like the doc strings were syntactically legal in, right after the function definition or whatever. And I think Guido said all we have to do is add this magic, instead of just like throwing that away, just add this magic attribute under doc, and suddenly you have doc strings. And
That's the only kind of conversation I contributed to.
yeah.
Got my mouth shut for everything else. Guido.
What I remember from those first days, and what I encourage you all to do, is we weren't selective in who do we let into the conference based on pedigree or position. The people who came to that first workshop were just the people who wanted to come most, the people who had the most things they wanted to talk about. And those people were from all over the place.
Yep.
They were in companies, at NASA, in academia, but like not big professors, but some like Steve Majewski had a teaching appointment, but every year I heard him complain about how his position was in danger because the dean didn't like him.
All right,
those were the kind of people we had.
We're over on time, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. We've got at least 20 more hilarious stories. 2 or 3 of them are true. Come and see us afterwards. Thank you very much for staying for this, and thank you for the panelists. Go PyCon.
23 more years.
How much over did we go?
All right, let's head out to the expo hall for the job fair, the poster sessions, and eventually lunch. See you there.